Again to McBride. This time's got a hold. Wayne McBride is off to the races. Can't hold him down forever. Touchdown, Blazers.
That's what we're going to do. Perfect. One bad snap can change the game, I promise. Here we go, here we go, here we go. Got to get it out. Got to get it out, got to get it out. Get it up, get it out. That's what we want. Hit the freaking gap. Here we go, here we go, here we go.
Yeah, I think everything is do you quit or not. I mean, and everything tells you to give in. And that's what I'm always looking for is how do they handle that? Because that's real adversity. I mean, you're at home, you got all your family here, everything tells you, and you know, to give in, and we didn't, you know. That's why we went for the onside kick. I mean, we're still trying to win this game. You know, if there's a second left, we're trying to win it. So I think that's the message to our players always. We never quit, we never give in, and I think you saw that out of our guys.
And welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Bud Elliott. That's Bill Clark. I'm Chip Patterson coming to you live at youtube.com/cover3 and all across the 24/7 Sports Facebook network. Thanks for hanging out. Tackle that subscribe, tackle that like, and come and join us in the chat. And we are so excited because we are, as you saw in that excellent intro video, pleased to welcome the winner 3 straight Conference USA division titles, who also claimed 2 outright Conference USA championships. He is the Conference USA Coach of the Year in 2017. He was the National Coach of the Year in 2018. And in 6 full seasons as head coach of the UAB Blazers, he had 6 or more wins in every single season. Being able to stick with and revive the UAB program has been one of the great stories in all of college football. We'll get more into that in a little bit, but first, Bill, thank you for joining us. How are you feeling? And what are you up to?
Yeah, I feel really good. You know, had surgery July 14th, and you know, of course, sitting out for a season as I recovered, and really just feel great now. You know, I had a back fusion, so it was a pretty serious surgery. It was my second back surgery, and really just to feel good now. It's awesome, and just good to be healthy. And really appreciative and feel blessed, you know, to be well.
Awesome.
Bill, have you been keeping up with the sport? I assume when you've been the sideline. I know when I texted you said you've been doing some speaking recently.
Yeah, you know, I've done a lot of speaking. I probably watched more different games this year than I've ever watched in my life. I think, you know, if it was a Tuesday game or a Thursday game, you know, I was watching it. Of course, got to watch the pros this year, and you know, I've always loved to watch games, but, you know, you had to really focus on your opponent unless you were, you know, doing an off-season film study, which we did a lot of that. But just to get to see a lot of different ball, was involved with the USFL last year. You know, we had a local team and we had all the teams here. So got some really good connections with those guys there. So I was involved with them somewhat. So really just been watching a lot of football. You know, I had a coach at a Nike clinic here in Birmingham about a month ago. We had tremendous speakers, so it's great to be around all those guys. And you know, I got to speak and bring in a lot of my guys as well that had coached for me. And then I'm gonna go, you know, watch some practice this spring. I'm gonna do some consulting and then just go hang out some as well.
That sounds awesome. I went to the Orlando Nike Clinic. I feel like as media, if you can go to those, it helps you sound like less of an idiot when you're talking about games, you know, on Saturday or doing your Monday morning quarterback stuff. The reason I wanted to have you on, and obviously, you know, to catch up would be great, but we have such kind of unprecedented, or people say it's unprecedented, action going on now in the transfer portal. And, you know, you have programs that have had, you know, some problems recently on the field in terms of, like, you know, Arizona State and Colorado and Charlotte who have struggled. And now they're bringing in Nebraska as well, just absolutely massive classes, mostly you know, fueled by the transfer portal, and you know, they have, you know, 40 or 45 or 47 guys, depending on which team you're talking about, who are coming in and are new to their program. And you know, when you have the spring transfer window as well, I think there's a pretty good chance some of these teams are going to hit 50, and if they go nuts, maybe might even hit 60 new players. And you know, people say that's unprecedented. I'm like, that's really uncommon, but I don't know how unprecedented it is when you figure out, look, Bill Clark, not by choice, but really by necessity, is a guy that not that long ago had to go in and rebuild his entire roster. And for folks who don't know the story, and fill in the gaps here if you can while we get you set back up on StreamYard, due to some, I would call it political BS, I would assume you'd agree on that. They shut down UAB's football program for 2 years following the 2014 season. I know the meeting to shut it down was pretty heated. We've seen that video. But a lot of groundswell of support did and brought UAB back, right? And they were extremely happy that UAB got back. And they said, hey, like, you're not going to be able to start up again until that 2017 season. So UAB took 2 years off of football. The article that I read said you guys were down to, I think, 12 players that remained on scholarship, down from a normal 85 before you started the rebuilding process. And of those, almost none had actually played in the game and were pretty young guys. When you found out that UAB football was coming back, obviously it was something you wanted because you didn't take another head coaching job, despite the fact you'd done a really good job with the program and were winning ball games. What was like the next thing that went through your head? It was like, okay, how do I build a roster from scratch, right? Like the last team I can kind of think of doing it might have been SMU in the 80s.
Yeah, so I think we had a technical difficulty for a second, but I think we were talking about the ability of teams, and I think you alluded to in Nebraska, be able to bring in all these numbers. And I'll tell you, when I got there in 14 at UAB, we had about 40 guys that were injured, had surgery. They had won 5 games in 3 years. I don't even know what I would have done with the ability to go past, the 25-man roster, what that could have done to change, even though, you look back in hindsight and it makes the story so great when you were able to flip a roster. I say flip a roster, but take what you had, add to it, and then for us to get 6 wins in that year and get bowl eligible was a miracle. Now, our program gets shut down. I decided to stay. All that's been chronicled over and over and over. Kind of the reasons. I'm from here, and there was so much support of our folks that that led to us bringing it back. We raised all this money, and so. But as that was starting, even before that started, what would coach, would you stay? And so we've lost everybody. Every player is left, other than about a dozen guys, and most of those guys were injured. We had a few guys like Darius Williams that just decided he was not going to play anymore if he didn't play for UAB. But as that thought was coming out, that we might play, I'm like, what do we do? So I did look at SMU. I've talked about that probably in most of the articles that when people have interviewed me through the years. And the reason I used SMU was because that was the only thing close to what we had experienced, where you don't even have a team. You've got to immediately come back and play. We weren't going back to FCS. We weren't going back to Division II. We were going back to FBS in 2 years with about 12 guys. And I knew SMU had come back with high school players. Now, of course, that was a death penalty from recruiting violations, and ours was self-imposed. So, 2 different things. But them coming back with 18-year-old kids against 20, 21, 22-year-old guys that had been in a program, just there was no chance. And I think what did they lose? They lost every game for 2 years, and then I think they won one in the third year. And that was pretty much, I said, that's something we cannot do. We had a little bit of time, and it wasn't like we were some great name, because not only had we had turned around a program that had been losing, but we had no program. So now you've got people not even knowing whether to believe in this program or not. So that's where the junior college mindset came in, and which can be similar to what, we're talking about with people flipping their rosters. But, it allowed us to go across the country and really just say, all right, we got to get older. We've got to, we're going to go out and try and get people that look the part. And then this will be something I know we'll want to talk about, is how do you bring those guys together and create a family?
Before we get to the culture part of this, what about the pitch? When you're going to these junior college players, what are you trying to sell them on about the future of UAB football?
Yeah. So, and I say this about coaches all the time, we're going to learn every good thing there is to know about a place. And I think for us, it was, pretty simply, there's nowhere to go but up, and that's kind of tongue in cheek, but, really it was, you've got to come in to play, and I think a kid that's coming from junior college, you quickly figure out there if they've been thinking about it, they realize they've only got 2 to 3 years at max to play. And I told them, I said, look, you're going to go somewhere where you're going to be fighting to play, where you're going to come here and you have to play. So that was a pretty good pitch. The other pitch we had was, we got to sit out for a year. So, I really looked at a lot of guys that had been injured. They had been terrific players. Maybe they tore a labrum. Maybe they had hurt their knee. Come in here, get well, really get your academics, which, we had great academics at UAB, get this great degree, maybe even get a master's, get a double major, and start this program. And, we called it the return. I don't know how, I kind of came up with that early on, and we started talking about the return. So we had something we were, I always say a catchy phrase. And then, but, my big deal was, come in here and make history. How many people really get to say that they made history in the game of college football? And I told them, I said, there's going to be some kind of history here, either good or bad, but, you're going to be part of making history. So I think the playing time, and then, the big thing for us, we had to go create better facilities. And so that was the one thing I said, to our guys that had gotten involved. And this was a lot of community guys that believed in Birmingham and knew how important UAB was for the community. And I'd say that about any football program, being the front porch of the university and a city. And so I think these guys understood. They really didn't maybe understood exactly how hard it was going to be, thank God, or they probably wouldn't have done it. But, we had to change our facilities, and that was the promise to these kids. We can't put them back in the horrible building we had. So we did go out and raise money and build facilities. So that was, I always say, you make a promise, you got to keep it. And so, I don't normally promise playing time ever. It's just you're going to get a chance to compete. This was different. We didn't have a team for that first year or so. But, I think, hey, the facilities are going to get better. We're going to make sure of that. And then everything else was pretty much there for the taking.
Bill, you mentioned that normally you don't promise playing time, and here you were able to obviously show them the route to playing time. I imagine, though, just in talking to the guys who are coaching college ball now, when they take transfers, they can kind of show that the path to playing time, maybe one guy at a position, maybe a second, but they're not able to necessarily flip a room, perhaps, of one position room, because guys look around and say, wait, you're already bringing him in as a transfer, and him and him.
Right.
Did it become harder to sell that playing time as you got into sort of that, like, the 22nd JUCO guy and the 30th junior college guy and transfer it? And how did you balance, like, not promising playing time at that point, but like how did you make all these guys who are about the same year or within a similar year of eligibility, how did you make them all believe that they would have a real shot for PT?
Well, I think, anybody that is the right competitor understands that we're taking multiple guys at the receiver position, the D-line. I mean, they were coming in on the same visits together. So when I say promising playing time, that was kind of a joke that we don't have any players, you got to play. But I think we all have talked about the chance to play. And a kid's going to look at the roster. And he's going to say, well, you've got a running back who's all conference. You've got another one behind him who played. Here I am. Now, the competitor in you says you can beat this guy out versus I could say, here's the roster. There's nobody. Maybe I'm bringing another guy just like you, but he's not an entrenched starter. Now, if I'm doing it today, I think you're just selling the opportunity to play. You're selling the opportunity to play. You're also selling the opportunity to change, like we said, to make history, to change what's going on at a place. And, usually in this recruiting, and that was what happened with us, and it's happened really always, these guys start recruiting each other. And I think, we're not just trying to create playing time. This is football. Football players want to win games. And so, if he only cares about himself and he only cares about playing time, he's not really somebody I wanted either. I wanted guys that wanted to be part of a winning team. So we were talking about winning. We were talking about creating a team. And so they were recruiting each other. So it became a lot more than just individual playing. Because I don't, when you start talking about, hey, I'm playing, but I'm on a horrible team, I don't know for a real football player how exciting that is either.
It's toxic for a locker room too, I would imagine.
Yeah. I'm just, I think, and it's so funny because I'm the person that would go so far to not ever promise somebody something that we couldn't deliver on, because once you get that guy there, he's there and he starts saying, wait a second, I was told X, Y, and Z. And that's why I laugh about the facilities. We had to have those. And I told guys, you're going to find me in a hole somewhere because I promised these guys this. And, and I don't like making promises I can't keep. Because we want to be, in truth and in reality. So I think that's the thing we always talk about in recruiting. And anybody that knows any good looks for guys that love the game. And, when you love the game, you understand there's competition, there's training, there's all those things that go with it. But I do think the ability to go and get 25, over 25 players is life-changing for people to come into new programs. Just because you're going, when the old coach leaves and the new coach comes in, you're going to have an exodus of guys. Maybe they follow that coach. Maybe they're just, they came because of the coach, which is a lot of times. So just the ability to get past that stop number to get to 30 and 35 and 40 and so on is life-changing.
Bill, we talk so often about the importance of having that, if you want to call him a bell cow recruit, right? A guy that other recruits seem to know who this guy is and they are willing to follow. I'm not sure if we lost Bill here, might have lost him, but I'll tell the audience a quick story and then I'll just ask Bill because he'll know the story I'm telling about. So had a kid named Greg Bryant, right, who was from the state of Florida, was a top 5 or top 10 running back in the country. I think he was class of, it was around like the time when Florida State was recruiting Jameis. So maybe 2012 or 2013 class-ish. And he had signed, I believe, with Notre Dame initially, and then he ended up having to bounce. Could have been academics, I forgot. Now, what happened to him afterwards was tragic. And we'll ask Bill when we get him back on. But I wanted to ask him, like, hey, how important is it to have a kid commit to you early in the process, like they did with Greg Bryant, who other dudes out there are like, oh, that guy can play. Like that's for real. Much like Colorado has had with a Travis Hunter and a Corvani McClain. Like you get one national name, I think it makes people more likely to buy into what you're doing with your process. Jim, you remember Greg Bryant?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's unfortunately, because it's like a tragic story, but I absolutely remember the name.
I think am I muted still? I don't know if we're still getting echo out of here for some reason. That's crazy.
There we go.
I don't know what happened. I'm back.
We got Bill back. So Bill, what I did, I just told the audience sort of the backstory. I'm a guy from Florida, covered recruiting in the 2010s in Florida. And I remember Greg Bryant really well. So I remember like when I saw that y'all were in on Greg Bryant, I was like, that's a name that other kids might know. Like, did that help legitimize your return process?
Yeah, 100%. Greg was an elite 5-star. If you want to say 5+, a guy who had been dominant at Notre Dame as a freshman, had really bad grade situation. And when we got Greg, I still remember I was speaking in Mobile to a quarterback club down there, and I get on the phone with this guy named Greg Bryant. And I mean, we were talking to so many hundreds and hundreds of kids, and there's Greg Bryant, and we just hit it off. And he came in, and I still remember before he went back home and ended up in the horrible, getting killed. He had gotten a 2.75 GPA at UAB. I remember him coming in my office with tears in his eyes and said, "Coach, I've never even come close to this." He was just so proud. And, I think at that first spring we had about 58 players. And so but to see him, just in that brief time we had him was just unbelievable. But yes, he did help legitimize. Just his name alone was a big deal.
Because that's the players recruiting other players.
Exactly. And that happens so much. And, that's when you get those kind of guys, and I'll say this, it was very interesting, the group we had, because we had guys from New York, California, Arizona, Miami, You name it, we had them from there. And bringing this group together was, as I always say, that'll be in the movie someday. But, you talking about some really big personalities. These guys, you're talking about a lot of 3, 4, 5. We had a few 5, but, a lot of 3 and 4-star guys that had been heavily recruited at big time places, and a lot of grades, where they just didn't go in and do their job. We didn't take bad people, but I think just to get those guys together, so you really had a lot of strong personalities, but Greg was very, very special.
Coming up on the other side, more with Bill Clark next.
At stake, the chance to put on the iconic green jacket. So golfers, are you ready? Go!
It's a tradition unlike any other. The Masters on CBS.
Back here with former UAB coach Bill Clark, taking some time out of his day to join us here on the Cover 3 podcast as we look at the modern era of college football, as many programs with new hires, they're trying to turn rosters, and nobody did it better or with more success than Bill Clark, who built a roster out after the program was shut down for 2 seasons. And again, in 6 full seasons as head coach, they had 6 or more wins in every single year, 5 straight years of being invited to a bowl game. Just a phenomenal job, and a lot that I think Colorado and Arizona State, Charlotte, a lot of programs can learn from that. As you are going about your role as a consultant right now, what are you hearing from coaches about personnel and roster building? Like, what are you picking up as you're having some of these conversations with the guys that are in the thick of it right now?
Yeah, obviously, I think everybody talks about what's the NIL doing to them, the transfer portal, having to recruit your own roster. That, of course, that's been going on for the last few years, but just that, and then of course, you're always talking about recruiting, you're always talking about scheme, you're always talking about training. So there's all the normal stuff that's, as I always say, that wakes you up at 3 a.m. and you don't sleep, and because Saturday's coming. I think that's the shirt that everybody needs. Everything's good, all this other stuff, but Saturday is waiting for you, and not one coach forgets that.
Bill, if you were talking to Dion at Colorado or Matt Rule at Nebraska and Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State, or maybe you already have, like what would your advice be for them for the culture aspect of this? Like, hey, guess what? You have now 70% of your roster is dudes who weren't here last year. What are some things you wish you could have done differently, perhaps, or things you learned pretty quickly that maybe they could use in their process?
Well, I'm probably a little different. I was part of the start of South Alabama. We started South Alabama football from nothing. And, I had done the same thing really. Prattville High School was summer. We had, 18 players show up for a meeting in June, which, you take a job in June, what do you expect? But, I had some experience in these things. And, UAB, when we get there, and it's just bad. I think the thing for all of them is that what they do, weight room training, that's where it's at. I'm an old strength and speed and track coach from way back. And I think that's where you do everything is just, how can we get them in there to get them training together? Obviously, the practice and the things that you do at practice, but, what are we doing as a team? What are we doing team bonding? What are we doing away from the field? What are we doing in our training that brings us together, makes us a family? And I think that's going to be the big thing when you're bringing guys in from everywhere. And I talked a lot about this with junior college guys, and I think it's the same thing with this NIL. You got to be careful you're not getting a bunch of mercenaries. And that's a strong word, I know, but it's you came for money or as a junior college player, everybody was a mercenary because there was no school left, so they had to sell themselves, they had to get their stats, that get mine, and so we had to get out of that mindset. Yet at the same time, we don't mind guys wanting to be great. We want them to want to be individually great, but we have to bring all that together with a team. So I think all the training, team building, all that is vitally important.
Bill, your connection to the UAB program is going to last forever. And I imagine that your time spent there and what you've given to that program means that you still hold it dear to your heart. The program is in major transition, not just in the coach, but also at the conference level. What would be, your advice? Maybe Trent Dilfer has reached out, or maybe some people around the program, you're still having those conversations, but what are your thoughts about the current state of UAB football as it makes the move from Conference USA, where it had been, thanks to your work and your staff, continually competing at the top of the conference? Now it's a brand new landscape, a few familiar neighbors that are all moving, with you on that move to the AAC. But what are your thoughts on where UAB is going to land in this reshuffled American Athletic Conference?
Yeah, first, this is a totally different deal than coming in after a coach has been fired or let go. Me retiring and us coming from winning, and Trent will be the first one to tell you, you're walking into a culture that is set, and now granted, as you bring in, I don't care how good your culture is, every year you're bringing in 15, 20, 25 guys that have to learn what that culture looks like. But, Trent was able to keep my strength coach and that strength staff. And, that's a really huge part of the daily, who those guys see more than they see their coaches. So I think that was a big deal that he was able to do that. I think going to the American is, it's going to be there's no doubt it's a step up. I don't think it's some monstrous step, but it is a step up. And so everything's just got to continue to improve and get better. But yeah, my heart will always be with UAB. There's just, too much of my heart and soul in that place, and I'm from here. So, obviously going to be pulling for them and wanting to see them do well.
Bill, I had a couple more just kind of, process. This is inside baseball, but we're kind of, in the off season here. And kind of nerd out on it if you would. I had a conversation with a G5 coach the other day, and he's like, look, Bud, I don't want to take this kid who's super raw out of high school, spend 2 years developing him when I know his ceiling, if he hits, is to go get an NIL deal from some major P5 program. Like, do you think G5s have to change sort of the way that they recruit high school in the transfer portal era now, almost like college baseball do, right? Like, hey, you can have the number one college baseball recruiting class, cool, but if it's all kids who are going to take the draft money, it doesn't really do you much good on the field. How do you think you would recruit differently in the high school in this sort of new transfer portal era?
I don't think there's anything that's off the table. So to your point, I think every thought that you can think about that is not a bad thought or a wrong thought. I mean, I can't say exactly where my mind would be, but I can see guys that think that way. And I remember Andy Kennedy, who's the basketball coach at UAB, and I talked about that, 3 years ago about recruiting your roster every year. And he said, I just what we do in basketball. And, and I laughed to myself, 13 guys versus 130. Now, granted, we only signed 85, but, that's just such a scary proposition. And, but that's where your mind is, should I take a guy that I could lose? I don't know. I was just our team and our family and our culture is going to keep these guys here. And I don't know if that's the world we're in anymore, but I do think the question is a valid one. And I think it would be something that's being considered by a lot of guys. And, what's the best way to handle that?
Go ahead. I was just going to say, it's fantastic to hear that you're feeling better and feeling good, and that you've been able to, get some of that relief that you were really seeking. And, I'm hearing you talk about, whether or not you would use the same approach if you were back in it. Are you starting to get a little bit of an itch as you're spending time around coaching? Is getting back into college football something that you might pursue here in the future?
I just don't know what I'm going to do. I think I had to put so much in me in these last few jobs. And this one was different. I think the back, and then I think I spent so much time trying to recover right here at the end of the season, which would have been the hiring cycle. I just wasn't ready. I just wasn't mentally ready. Now I feel really good. My mind's good, and I'm excited to get back around practice. And I'll know, how I feel. I think just going to practice, I'm going to watch Jacksonville State today. Coach Rod's a buddy of mine, and I got, one of my coaches is up there. So I'm going to go watch them today. So there's definitely a lot of things I miss. There's some things I don't miss, but there's a lot of things I do miss. And so we'll just see what happens.
Bill, what actually goes into a consulting gig for college football? I bet you that's something that our audience really just has no concept of.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a deal where there's some guys would just say, and I know, obviously this is not some huge financial commitment. This is more, hey, come watch us practice and just tell me what you think. And, I love doing that, whether it was my dad or Jack Crow, who was in town, or anybody that I trusted that would come give me as I said, they got no dog in the hunt other than to see us do well. What do you see? What do you see in meetings? What do you see from our players? Just give me honest thoughts from somebody that I trust. And so that's kind of what this is looking like. It's more of a just, what do you see? Give me honesty. And I think for all of us, it's, boy, that looks good. I really love your practice organization. Maybe here's something to think about. But as much of that as you're watching the coaches, and that's what I spent all my time doing. I watch my coaches, and not so much really just exactly how they were doing it, but, are they using their time wisely? Are they pushing their guys? Are they pushing them the right way? I think that's the consulting part for me, is just kind of, give an overview of somebody's program. And maybe there's one little thing. We're all looking for that one little thing to help us win.
Jacksonville State, I'm sure, as they prepare, we talk about the big movements. Jacksonville State's about to be a Conference USA member. We are seeing a lot of shifting right there. And as you mentioned, Rich Rodriguez, the head coach, it's going to be a fun year in the CUSA. That's for sure. You think Jacksonville State's built? Can you take a temperature or give us a little insight into where that roster is looking? How you think that they're going to be as they prepare to make that jump to the FBS?
Yeah, I can't really tell you because I hadn't even seen him practice, but I know Coach Trickett really well. From what I've seen from him, and once again, he came into a really good situation as far as FCS goes. I was there. Coach Gross did a great job, and then he come in. You get you another great coach comes in there and just has a great year. But you are going to a different level this year, and so we'll see. I haven't got to see him yet. I know what kind of coach he is. I know what kind of Coach Trickett. I've got to hear their staff. They came and spoke at my clinic. So, I feel like they're going to do well, but it is going to be a jump for them, no doubt.
Wait, is that Rick Trickett up there now?
Yep.
If you guys had never seen Rick Trickett coach a practice, Jimbo Fisher camp, like 2007 or 8, they had got hired. And Rick has an interesting coaching style, and he's not afraid to tell you what he thinks about your performance. And it was a little bit different than some of the Bobby Bowden camps at the time. And Coach Bowden was still living back then. Maybe this was 2009. I think it was Rick and James Coley, and we're watching these drills, and this mom comes up. She's like, "If Coach Bowden heard the language that y'all were using during this football camp, he would roll over in his grave." And I'm like, Coach Bowden retired. He's not dead. But we just held it together. It was, they could sell Rick Trickett practice footage and charge for it. He's an awesome guy to watch.
He's true old school.
Yeah,
no doubt.
True old school through and through. Well, Bill, thank you so much for taking some time to sit down with us here at the Cover 3 podcast. Our audience really appreciates the insight that you've been able to give. The story that you have with UAB football is tremendous. Like you said, the return will be a movie one day, and we can all sit down and enjoy it with popcorn too, just the way that we enjoyed covering it professionally and getting to watch you lead that charge. So as we say farewell to Bill, thank you so much, and we appreciate it. And it's fantastic, truly, to hear that you are feeling better, and that seems to be a big part of your life. So thank you, Bill. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Enjoyed it.
See you.
Take care, Bill.
Coming up on the other side, we've got some interesting developments on the recruiting trail in the 2024 cycle, particularly around 5-star Dylan Raiola. We'll give you we'll give you the news and our expectations, and of course what it means next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast once again. Thank you to former UAB coach Bill Clark. We reached out to him. We thought he had interesting perspective on the roster building process, and of course, it turns out that he's talking to a lot of these coaches. He's definitely got his finger on the pulse of what's going on. But Bud, we got to turn our attention to the recruiting trail because the pursuit of 5-star quarterback Dylan Raiola is starting to heat up. He, of course, is not just a 5-star prospect. He is the number 1 quarterback in the class. According to 24/7 Sports, he is the number 1 overall player in the class, 6'3", 220 pounds, out of Arizona. And we've got a recent crystal ball for Dylan Raiola to USC. This coming on the tails of a USC visit. And the idea that a 5-star quarterback would connect with Lincoln Riley seems like, oh yeah, of course, duh. But it sounds like this is just as much about what other programs might be missing out on.
Absolutely. Do we have the video? Because this wasn't just in a crystal ball. I mean, this is Steve Wiltfong, with feeling that USC is in a great spot for Dylan Raiola.
Steve, what are you hearing coming out of Raiola's visit to SoCal that has you changing your pick from Georgia to now USC?
Well, I talked to Dylan Raiola following another visit to USC, and he said it was a blast. Every time I go back, I just love it more and more. And he got a chance to spend time in meetings with Coach Riley and see how he interacts with the whole team, but also getting an opportunity to hang out with Caleb Williams and pick his brain about USC and how he's handled everything was another thing that was exciting for him. But he got to watch a spring practice, hang out with Coach Riley, hang out with Caleb Williams, and I think just as he continues to go through his process here, and he's still trying to get back to Georgia. He's going to visit Nebraska at the end of March. That it's USC that's kind of taken the momentum. Georgia had the momentum coming out of the national championship game, and we'll see if they can get that back with another visit here. And Nebraska certainly doing all they can to get Dylan Raiola to come to Lincoln. But at this point, I like where USC stands in this recruitment.
Yeah, Steve, I think it's interesting because I was looking through the comments and the replies on that Twitter message, right? The post that went out from the 24/7 Sports account. A lot of fans are wondering, why would he go there? Malachi Nelson just signed with the Trojans, the 5-star quarterback from Southern California. But then you think about Dylan Raiola, you think about his makeup and his moxie, and I don't think he's shying away from any sort of competition. So I wouldn't expect that to be a hindrance for USC. He knows he has to compete wherever he goes. And that connection with Lincoln Riley is something that gives me a bit of confidence with that crystal ball prediction. I think that whatever he sees in what Riley can do for him as a developer, and then obviously with that offense, all the skill talent that they bring in, it's close to home in Arizona. They're building a new house there in the suburbs outside Phoenix. That would be a driving distance for his family as well. And he trains in Los Angeles at 3D QB out in Orange County. So those are all different layers that I think work in USC's favor.
Yeah, the number 1 quarterback in the class who was committed to the Ohio State Buckeyes for much of the summer and fall of 2022. On December 17th, he officially decommitted, and that's when Georgia got in the mix. That's when Nebraska got in the mix, and that's when now, yes, as we are sitting here on March 8th, USC does appear to be very much in the mix. What's your big takeaway from these latest developments from the recruiting trail? And again, thank you to the 24/7 recruiting show, college football recruiting show on the 24/7 Sports Network for that clip right there.
Absolutely. It was great to hear from those guys and Emily as well. My take here is, sure, it's great if USC gets Dylan Raiola. He's the number 1 player in the class. The guy's a stud, right? And I'm sure Ohio State will be fine because it's Ryan Day and quarterbacks, Chip. Like, he's going to get another really good QB. And I think Georgia, before Todd Monken had left, was actually in a really good spot with him. He was in the box with Matt Stafford watching the national championship game. But, I go and I look at the other school that was mentioned there, Nebraska. His uncle, Dominic Raiola, who was a really good player, obviously, for the school and for the Detroit Lions, is the offensive line coach there under new coach Matt Rule. And I would comp this a little bit to what Penn State went through with Justin Fields. Okay. Lincoln Riley, Ryan Day, and Kirby Smart have a real chance to sign the number 1 player in the country every year. Penn State didn't, but they had Justin Fields committed for a whole summer. And that's something you can really dream on And when you have a special connection with a kid and you're not a top 10, not a top 20 type program like Nebraska has not been, at least during Dylan Raiola's lifetime, you have to cash that in. And like, that is a type of player who could, not necessarily will, but could change the entire trajectory of how your career goes at Nebraska if you're Matt Rule. Like, Penn State hasn't gotten over the hump of winning a national title, of making a deep playoff run. They've had a lot of really good years, but we always ask, hey, if they could ever get quarterback right. They almost had it when they had Justin Fields decommitted, and then he decommitted, went to Georgia and went to Ohio State. I wonder if there's a question here about the coordinator hire, man. They went and they hired Marcus Satterfield, who was at South Carolina. South Carolina's offense this year was a dumpster fire, despite the fact that they got 5-star transfer Spencer Rattler in. And if you're Raiola and you're looking at these, you're like, okay, what's his track record of developing quarterbacks compared to Lincoln Riley or Ryan Day or Georgia, which has 5 stars at almost every position? I think that's probably worth a discussion. I mean, that's a leap of faith if you commit to Satterfield, who is Matt Rule's buddy and has been with him at prior stops. But I don't know. Like, one of these things is not like the other. If you do the song with it, I know I do it with my son. I'm sure you do it with yours, or maybe that was just embarrassing. I just sung on the air. Man, I don't know. Like, this does feel like a missed opportunity if Nebraska can't cash this in.
You tell me if I'm wrong about this, but the sense that I'm getting from the modern day 5-star top of the class quarterback is that they are the franchise, that they should be able to show up and, like, doesn't matter who the coach is. I mean, it probably matters to their parents, to people in their decision-making web, but that if you are the kind, like, for example, the kind of drive that would lead Dylan Raiola to see that Malachi Nelson's already going to be on the roster and say, I don't care. I'm going to step into that. I would think that he would be committing to Nebraska because of that connection, but would also believe that he is going to be the change that can happen. And listen, we've had offensive coordinators who have had their stock boosted in ways that do not tie at all to the exact makeup or coaching grade that we would otherwise apply to an offensive coordinator, just because they've got that dude at quarterback. I think it's a tough sell for Nebraska to be going head to head with USC, with Georgia, who might not be out of the, I mean, like, Mike Bobo is still very much like has his own path to be able to get to Dylan Raiola as well. Like, it's the offensive coordinator hire might play a role for sure, but some of it might just also be the fact that Nebraska is trying to swim in the deep end with 3 massive recruiting powers of the modern football landscape.
I think that's very fair. And normally, like, Nebraska they don't even get in the gate to try to jump in the pool in the deep end, right? Like, that for a level of player this high. So this is going to be one to watch, man. This is a really important recruitment for Matt Rule if you're a Nebraska fan that thinks they can get back to winning a national title. And as you transition, the Big Ten is most likely going to do away with divisions, I would assume, right? And they'll go to a more of a 9-game schedule. You're going to need some big guns when you have to play Ohio State and Penn State and Michigan annually. And if Michigan State gets back up to what they were, and Maryland, shout out, because we have some Maryland listeners who were mad that we didn't mention Maryland's excellent combine showing. Excellent combine showing.
Deontay Banks was fantastic.
Tremendous job, Maryland, at the combine. They won 8 games, I think, with one of the top number of guys invited to the combine, and they did have nice performances there. So, look, this is really important that Nebraska stays in this fight. And we talked with Bill Clark in the first segment about the bell cow. When they got Greg Bryant there at UAB, when Dion got Travis Hunter, it can legitimize your tenure at a program. So certainly one to watch, and that was some big news last night on the 24/7 Sports Recruiting Show from Wilt Fong and Blair Angulo.
Hey, and this is just an unnecessary, just extra little spicy nug thrown in here. But did you know that 8 wins is the most that Maryland has had since 2010?
I actually think they're doing a good job there. That's just a hard job in that division.
Like, Mike Locksley in his 4th season guided the team to more wins than they had in 12 years. He's the right guy for the job. He's doing good things, and they showed out at the NFL Draft Combine as well. I'm never afraid to be able to say we overlooked something. We only have but so many minutes in a show, and sometimes the conversation gets away from us. But yes, Maryland doing a good job on the field, and yes, they had a good showing at the Combine. Well, Bud's about to get kicked out of the studio, so we're about run out of our time here, but we will be back on Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern time. It is going to be opening up the big old bag of mail, and we had a great response from the live audience, some of whom jumped in early, even before the show started. You throw your question in there. We will be taking live audience questions throughout, and of course, if you leave us a 5-star review and put your question in that review, we will tackle it in a future mailbag episode. And you can follow him on Twitter at BudElliott3. You can follow me at Chip_Patterson. Bud, thank you very much.
See you, Chip.